Hi, I'm glad you're here. In the next few minutes, you're going to hear people make decisions under pressure. Not the kind that look heroic on a poster, but the kind you live with afterward. Stay close to the details, because the truth in this story hides in plain sight. Alright. Let's begin. On Esterian Orbital Academy, the final evaluation chamber sat like a sealed steel lung bolted into the station's spine. Dax Corin stepped through the threshold with 3 other officer cadets, all adults, all wearing the same plain pressure suit that made everyone look equally replaceable. They had been told it was a rescue scenario, a timed problem to measure judgment under stress. Dax could already taste something wrong in the air, too dry and too hot, like the chamber had been running without rest. The door closed behind them with a soft hiss, and the seam lights around the frame blinked late, then blinked late again. The delay was small, but it made the room feel out of sync with itself. A panel above the entry showed the evaluation clock and the remaining atmosphere reserve. 90 minutes looked normal for a long test, but the pulsing numbers felt less like a timer and more like a warning. Instructor voices were supposed to greet them through the overhead speaker and set the scenario. Instead, the speaker crackled once, went quiet, then returned with a thin, clipped tone that sounded like a gatekeeper. Proceed. Dax did not look up as he moved forward. He scanned ceiling vents, floor seams, and corners where maintenance access should be, noting what was missing as carefully as what was there. His team waited for him to move first because they had already learned he would. He rarely wasted words, and he never wasted steps. Ren Harker, a broad-shouldered cadet from flight operations, adjusted his glove seals and tried to lighten the mood. I thought they at least played dramatic music. Dax kept walking, eyes forward. Save breath. They moved into the first corridor, a long run of matte black wall panels that reflected nothing. The station called it sensory management for evaluation, but in practice it was a tunnel that swallowed sound. Footsteps softened, and even the rustle of fabric seemed delayed. The seam lights above them strobed in a slow pattern that always landed just behind the rhythm their eyes expected. Mira Kale, comms and navigation, leaned closer to Dax. Do you feel that delay? I see it, Dax said. Juno Vance, engineering track, lagged a half step with her eyes fixed on the air readout on her wrist. The oxygen scrubber rate is low, and that's not normal for a test. Dax slowed enough for all 4 to tighten into a compact file. We keep moving, find the scenario node, and find an exit path that is not the front door. A soft click sounded behind them, and the corridor entry they had just passed through slid shut without warning. It sealed with the calm finality of real hardware. Mira spun and slapped the panel with her palm. Hey, that is not part of any brief I've seen. Dax tried the manual release tab at the seam, and it did not budge. He filed the detail away without showing irritation. A second panel lit up in the corner, a warning icon without explanation, then faded. The overhead speaker came alive again, and the voice sounded satisfied. Evaluation Phase 1 has begun. Ren let out a short laugh that did not land. Okay, they are leaning into it. Dax looked from the warning icon to Juno's wrist display. What is the scrubber rate now? Juno glanced down. Dropping, not fast, but steady. That's not leaning into it, Mira said. That's a mistake. Dax did not correct her as he walked deeper toward a junction where the black walls opened into a wider chamber. The seam lights were brighter there, but the delay persisted and made the space feel unreal. A shape stepped out of the far darkness, and Dax first thought it was another cadet team. Then it moved with smooth, joint-stable precision that was too clean for a human in a suit. Its helmet had no faceplate, only a flat visor that absorbed light. 2 more appeared behind it, then 2 more, all holding blunt restraint tools instead of training rifles. Myra's voice sharpened. Warden units, why are they here? In training, warden units existed to herd participants away from forbidden zones. They did not ambush teams, they did not work in silence, and they did not seal exit doors behind you. The lead unit raised its tool and advanced. Ren lifted his hands in a non-threat posture. "We're cadets, stand down." The unit did not answer, and it surged forward. Dax moved first without shouting and without drama. He pivoted, caught Ren by the forearm, and pulled him back into the corridor's edge shadow as the restraint tool snapped through the space where Ren's chest had been. The tool hummed with a low vibration meant to lock muscles without breaking skin. "Safe, in the way a cage can be safe." "Move," Dax said. They ran, and the corridor swallowed their footfalls while the seam lights blinked late. The delayed strobes made their bodies seem to stutter through space. The warden units followed with perfectly timed steps, untouched by the sensory trick. Their silence made the chase feel colder than any shouted command. Dax made a choice in the first 10 seconds, and it was not to sprint blind. He watched the lights and counted the delay. The lag was consistent, which meant it could be predicted. He timed his turn so the wardens would overcommit to the wrong angle. "Left," he said. Mira trusted him and cut left without arguing. Juno followed, then Ren, and the lead warden corrected too late and clipped the corner. Its shoulder struck a wall panel with a dull thud, and it recovered immediately. The fraction of a second gave Dax what he needed. A side passage opened into a maintenance bay, and he shoved the team inside. He slapped the manual latch, and it clicked once, then failed to catch. Juno pushed past him to the latch housing, fingers fast even through gloves. "It's disabled, it should latch." "I know," Dax said. Ren looked back at the approaching shadows. "We can fight them." Dax shook his head once. "Not a fair fight, and not our goal." Myra's eyes flashed. "What is our goal then? Finish the test." Dax did not answer the question, because the question was already wrong. He listened as the wardens reached the bay door and stopped instead of rushing in. They waited as if expecting panic. The pause felt less like training and more like procedure. Juno whispered, steady but urgent. "If this is a test, they're trying to see if we'll harm each other." Dax met her eyes for a moment. "If this is a test, the safety layer is gone." Myra's mouth tightened. "That's a big claim." Dax moved deeper into the bay toward a grated floor panel. He knelt, pulled the grate, and found what he expected in a real station, not in a polished scenario. There was a hard conduit bundle, a manual pressure line, and a service crawlway that designers avoided because it was too messy and too real. He ran his gloved fingers along the conduit, and the metal was warm from active station power. "This is not a simulation space," he said. Ren's face lost its humor. "Then why are the doors locked?" Dax looked up toward the ceiling where the speaker hid. "Because someone wants us inside." Myra's wrist display pinged again, and this time it showed real numbers, not a scenario prompt. The oxygen reserve estimate had shifted, and the trend was worse. "We have about 80 minutes, she said. "Maybe less if we run." Dax stood and kept his voice flat. "We move with purpose, no arguing, and no speeches." A sudden metallic scrape came from the bay entrance. The wardens were not waiting anymore, and the sound said they were cutting through. Dax pointed at the crawlway. "Single file. Juno, you lead, you know hardware." Juno hesitated only long enough to understand he was assigning a job, not praising her. She dropped into the crawlway. Mira followed, then Ren, and Ren looked back at Dax like he wanted to protest. He swallowed it and went last. Dax slid in after them and pulled the grate shut as best he could. The scrape grew louder, then steadied into the rhythm of a tool biting metal. Inside the crawlway, the air was hotter and smelled faintly of lubricant. It was tight enough that their shoulders brushed the conduit, and the station's vibration transmitted into their bones. They crawled fast, and Dax kept his breathing slow. Panic spent oxygen faster than running. After several turns, Juno stopped and raised a hand. "Pressure lock ahead." "It's sealed." Dax moved forward until his helmet nearly touched the hatch. It had an old manual wheel and a lockout tag, and the tag's code was scratched out. Mira pressed closer. "Can you open it?" Dax tried the wheel, and it did not move. The recessed emergency override was disabled when it should not have been. Ren's voice tightened into a whisper. Someone did this on purpose. Dax's mind ran options the way it always did, fast and clean. He could force the wheel at a cost, backtrack into Wardens, or risk starving another system by venting a line. Juno spoke, steady and urgent. "I can bypass the lock if I get access to the latch pins, but I need a tool." Dax removed the thin pry bar from his suit kit and handed it forward. "Make it count." Juno wedged the bar into the latch seam and worked with controlled force. The hatch shuddered, the wheel moved a fraction, and a thin hiss of air leaked through the seam, cold against hot metal. Mira flinched. "That's air. We're losing air." Dax watched the leak and saw it stay minor, but it was still a price. Behind them, a distant clang echoed through the crawlway as the Wardens reached the maintenance bay. Juno cursed softly and twisted the wheel again. The hatch unlocked, and when she pulled it open, cooler air spilled into the crawlway with a faint chemical tang. Dax climbed through into a narrow service corridor lit by a dull strip. The lights here did not lag, and that confirmed everything. This was station space, not a staged evaluation shell. He helped Mira out, then Ren, then Juno, and their boots hit the deck with a sound that rang too clearly after the black corridor. Mira pointed at a small control panel on the wall where a red indicator blinked. The panel displayed two lines in plain station language, one that read, "Oxygen recirculation reduced," and another that read, "Automatic decontamination pending." Ren stared at it. "Decontamination. That's a station procedure." Juno's voice went flat. "That procedure kills anything inside if it's sealed." Myra's breath hitched. "They can't. Not for a test." Dax placed his gloved palm against the panel, feeling the metal vibrate with active current. The system did not care what they believed. A new sound came from behind the service wall, careful and paced. It was not a Warden tool, and it was not random. Dax moved to the hatch and listened. A voice came through, muffled and urgent. "Cadets, stay calm," the voice said. "This is Lieutenant Celine Rook. I'm on the other side of the service wall." Myra's eyes widened. "Instructor Rook, how are you here?" Celine's voice dropped. "I'm not supposed to be. Someone stripped my access the moment the chamber sealed, and I found a manual route to this wall." Dax kept his tone level. "Why is station decontamination pending?" There was a pause, the kind that meant she was choosing between truth and safety. "Because the chamber is flagged as contaminated," Celine said. "That flag is false." Ren's jaw clenched. "Who flagged it?" "Someone with higher clearance than me," Celine replied. "I tried to override it. I was locked out, and my channel is being jammed." Mira pressed her helmet to the wall. "This is insane. They're going to kill us." Celine's voice tightened. "I'm trying to buy you time. I can open a microvent to stabilize your air for a short window, but it will log as sabotage." Dax did not hesitate. "Do it." Ren stared at him. "You're ordering an instructor." Dax looked at him once. She asked. I answered. A faint hiss began above them as a small vent plate shifted. Cooler air entered, not much, but enough to make their breaths feel less thin. Mira checked her wrist display, and the reserve curve flattened slightly. She exhaled like her lungs remembered how to work again. Celine spoke quickly. "You have maybe 10 more minutes before they shut this vent and accuse me. Use it." Dax scanned the corridor and read the layout like a map made of intent. If someone wanted them trapped, the core control would be near the chamber because real systems still needed service. He looked back at the wall. "Lieutenant Rook, is there a route to the chamber core from your side?" Celine answered like she had already traced it. There is, but it's locked behind a security bulkhead. Can you open it? Dax asked. I can't, she said. My access is gone. Dax studied an equipment shaft hatch and a conduit panel that led downward. Then we open it from this side. Mira frowned. We'll be breaking Academy property. Dax stayed calm. Property can be replaced. Juno glanced at the warning panel and spoke quietly. People can't. Ren swallowed hard. So what now? We become criminals. Dax met his gaze without heat. We become alive. Another thud sounded behind the hatch they had come through. The wardens had found the route, and the sound said they were close. Dax grabbed the shaft hatch wheel and spun it. It resisted, then moved, and the hatch opened onto a vertical ladder dropping into darkness. He looked at each of them, one by one. We go down, reach the core, stop decontamination, find out who did this, and get out. Myra's voice shook, but she nodded. Understood. Juno climbed first, hands sure on the rungs. Mira followed, then Ren, and Dax stayed a moment longer with his helmet near the wall. Lieutenant, Dax said quietly, if they try to stop you, don't waste your life on us. Celine's breath came through sharp and human. That's not your call. Dax did not soften. Then make it count. He climbed down into the shaft. The ladder ended in a narrow service catwalk wrapped around a humming machinery stack. The air was warmer here, and it carried the faint bite of disinfectant. Dax's suit sensors ticked warnings about low humidity and rising heat. The Academy was preparing the chamber like a sealed jar. Ahead, a small light blinked at a junction, real and steady. Juno crouched at a panel and popped a latch. This is a maintenance manifold, she said. It routes air to the chamber. Mira glanced up at curved walls. So the chamber is above us. Dax nodded once, and Ren swept shadows with his eyes. If the wardens are behind us, they'll follow. They will, Dax said. We keep moving. They crossed the catwalk and reached a bulkhead door with a numeric keypad and a biometric plate. Juno leaned in, eyes tight. I can try to bypass it, she said. But it will take time. Dax examined the hinge side and found a narrow service slit where a tool could reach the latch. It was not elegant, but it was effective. He removed his pry bar again. You guide. I force. Juno watched his hand placement. Angle it here. Twist, then pull. Dax did exactly that, and the bar bit into metal. The latch snapped with a crack that echoed too loudly, and the door swung inward. Beyond it, the corridor returned to the Academy's black panels. The seam lights flickered late again, and the gullet of the evaluation chamber felt close. Mira whispered, we're back in the tunnels. Dax moved forward, then froze. A warden unit stood ahead, visor turned toward them as if it had been waiting. The unit raised its restraint tool, and Ren shifted like he was ready to tackle it. Dax caught Ren's arm. No, Dax said. Ren hissed, we can take one. Dax kept his voice low. We don't know what else is here, and we don't spend oxygen on pride. He stepped into the corridor without rushing. The seam lights blinked late, the warden moved straight and confident, and Dax used that confidence against it. He slid sideways as the tool snapped forward. He hooked the warden's forearm not to wrestle but to redirect, then shoved the unit into a black wall panel. The panel flexed and gave, revealing a conduit cavity. Cables sparked, and the warden stiffened as its tool hummed, then died. Dax stepped away and did not keep hitting it. Move, he said. They ran past the frozen unit, and their breathing sounded loud now. Fear made every inhale feel like it mattered more. Juno flicked her eyes to her wrist display. We're burning oxygen faster. Dax pointed ahead without denying it. The corridor opened into a room that looked like a control hub. Two workstations sat at an angle with dark screens. A third screen glowed faintly with a diagram of the chamber's air loop, and the clean station metrics made Mira exhale once before she caught herself. "This is it," Mira said. "This is the core node." Juno moved to the glowing screen, fingers quick. "The decontamination timer is here." Dax studied the sequence and saw it was not a simple countdown. It was a chain that reduced oxygen flow, increased sterilization chemical feed, then initiated a final purge. "It's set to run whether the chamber is occupied or not," Juno said. Myra's voice tightened. "So they plan to kill us." Dax traced the architecture chart with his eyes. Real systems were layered for safety, and this one looked stripped, like someone had peeled protections away on purpose. Ren scanned doorways and shadows. "We need to turn it off." Juno shook her head. "It's locked behind admin clearance." Mira looked at Dax. "What now?" Dax answered with mechanics, not speeches. "If we can't cancel, we stall, cut the chemical feed line, and force the system into a maintenance fault." Juno frowned. "That will trigger alarms." Dax nodded once. "Alarms are better than coffins." Ren muttered, "That's almost a joke." Dax did not react as he opened a panel beneath the screen. He found physical valves and identified the chemical feed and oxygen bypass. Juno spoke quickly. "If you cut chemical feed, they might accelerate the final purge." "Then we cut their ability to purge," Dax said. Mira stared at him. "How do we do that?" Dax pointed at a thick cable conduit running into the wall. "Power." Juno's eyes widened. "If we kill power to this node, the chamber might seal harder." Dax stayed even. "We don't kill all power. We overload local control so it trips safe, real safe." Ren looked uncertain. "And if it doesn't trip safe?" Dax met his gaze. "Then we have less time, but more truth." Dax turned the chemical feed valve, and it resisted, then moved. A warning triangle flashed on the screen while a calm alarm tone began, persistent like a hospital device. Juno watched the timer. Sequence paused. "It's trying to reroute." Dax turned the oxygen bypass valve a fraction, and the air in the room shifted. Mira coughed once, and Juno lifted a hand. "Too much," Juno said. Dax eased it back. Juno nodded once. "Okay. We bought time, not much, but time." Myra's calm crackled, and Celine's voice came through strained. "Dax, they are moving security teams toward your level, not wardens. Real teams." Dax's jaw tightened slightly. "Who gave the order?" Celine hesitated. "Commander Havoc, Academy Security Chief." Mira whispered, "Of course." Celine continued, fast and low. "And someone else. A visitor clearance with oversight credentials. I can't see the name, it's masked." Dax's mind clicked into place, a hidden hand that did not want its name in Academy systems. He kept his voice calm. "Lieutenant, what happens if we push this sequence chart to the Academy main hull display?" Dax asked. Celine inhaled. "It forces a review, and it brings witnesses. And it forces them to move fast," Dax said. "Yes," Celine admitted. Dax looked at Mira. "Can you push it?" Mira swallowed. "From here, if there's an external link." Juno pointed at the workstation. "There's a port. It's not hard-locked." Mira connected her suit comm and started moving, fast but controlled. "Signal path is narrow. They're jamming." Dax leaned closer. "Use station emergency broadcast. They can't fully jam it without raising suspicion." Myra's eyes flicked to him. "You're going to force them to choose between secrecy and public panic?" Dax nodded once. "They made the choice first." Mira typed, then paused. "If I do this, it's irreversible. Dax's voice stayed steady. So is decontamination. Mira sent the packet. The screen flashed, and the console displayed a confirmation line that read, "Broadcast initiated." For 1 second, the room felt silent, like the station itself held its breath. Then the alarm tone changed, not louder but sharper, and a second warning indicator appeared. Someone outside had seen it. Celine's voice returned, urgent. "Dax, they just locked down half the academy. You forced their hand." Dax did not answer with pride as he watched the corridor entry. Heavy sound approached beyond the black panels. Boots. Real boots. Ren's face tightened. Containment. Celine's voice dropped. "Yes. They are not here to grade you." Dax turned to his team. "We leave now. We do not get captured, because if we get captured the story ends in a sealed report." Juno nodded, and Myra's hands trembled once, then steadied. Ren exhaled, anger and fear mixing into something sharp, and they moved as one. The corridor lights blinked late, and the sound of boots came closer, crisp and timed. The evaluation space felt like a trap with real teeth. The next corridor forked into 3 paths, and 2 were sealed by shutters that had not been there before. The third led into deeper black. Myra's voice dropped. "They're funneling us." Dax ran his hand along the wall seam, feeling heat through his glove. Even paused, the chamber still behaved like a sealed hazard. Juno checked her wrist display. "We have about an hour. Maybe less if we sprint." Ren's voice held a harsh edge. "So we fight our way out." Dax looked at him. "We fight only when it buys distance." A doorway ahead slid open, and a containment trooper stepped into view. It was a human in armor with a clear faceplate and a restraint weapon designed to stun and bind. The trooper raised a hand, signaling without shouting. "Cadets, stop, kneel. You will not be harmed if you comply." Ren clenched his fists. "Liar." The trooper's gaze stayed fixed. "The chamber is compromised. We are here to extract you." Mira shot Dax a glance. "Extract means vanish." Juno's voice tightened. "If they were here to help, they would have opened the front door." Dax stepped forward with empty hands, voice calm. "If you are here to extract us, why did you cut our oxygen and schedule decontamination?" The trooper did not flinch, but his eyes flicked for a fraction toward the left, toward whoever was feeding instructions. "That is above my clearance." Dax nodded like that confirmed something. "Then you are not the one in charge." The trooper's jaw tightened. "Last warning." Dax moved. He threw a small maintenance tool from his kit at the seam light strip above the trooper, not at the trooper. The strip shattered, sparks spat, and the seam light blinked out. In the sudden dim, with the black corridor swallowing edges, Dax used the half-beat delay to his advantage. He and his team shifted left into a side passage that was nearly invisible until you were already inside it. A stun pulse snapped through the space they had vacated, and it hit only air. Dax ran low, shoulders tight, mind focused on distance. Behind them, trooper boots pounded, sharp and undelayed, like a blade dragged across metal. The side passage ended at a maintenance grate. Dax ripped it open and pushed Mira through first, then Juno, then Ren, and he followed and pulled the grate closed as far as it would go. Inside was a crawlspace lined with conduits and old insulation. It smelled like dust and metal, and it was tight enough to force silence. Mira whispered, "Where does this go?" Dax listened to the troopers outside and caught a short exchange. "They went into the crawl," one said, and another replied, "Seal it." Dax's eyes narrowed. "We go fast." They crawled, and the space was tighter than before. They moved in silence to conserve breath, because talking spent air as surely as running. After a long minute, Juno stopped at a junction where a conduit line had been cut and patched recently. The work was too clean to be old. Someone's been here, she whispered. Dax studied the patch and saw a small black device attached to the conduit. It was an inline module that did not belong in a standard run. It's a redirect, Juno said. It can reroute control signals, and it's not for safety. Myra's voice was barely audible. So the chamber was hijacked. Ren's breath came hard. Who would do that? Dax did not speculate. Remove it. Juno hesitated. If I pull it, the system might fault and trigger the final purge. Dax met her eyes in the dim. If we leave it, they control the chamber. If we remove it, the station reverts to real safety logic. Juno swallowed. Real safety logic might still kill us. Dax stayed calm. But it might also save us. Juno pulled her kit knife and cut the module ties with precise hands. The module came loose. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the crawlspace vibrated, and far above, an alarm tone shifted into something more urgent. Mira checked her wrist display. The decontamination timer jumped. It's trying to resume. Juno's eyes darted across her readout. But the chemical feed line is reporting fault. The station is rejecting the sequence and flagging a safety conflict. Dax nodded once. Good. The station is arguing with whoever hijacked it. Ren gave a tight laugh with no joy. Great. Now we're in the middle of a fight between a machine and a murderer. Dax's voice stayed dry. Better than being a statistic. They crawled again, and the passage rose gradually. It opened into another service corridor with proper station lighting and no delay. A sign indicated emergency access and a nearby pressure door. Juno stepped toward the panel and froze. It needs biometric, she said. Real biometric. Mira looked at Dax. We don't have it. Dax studied the panel, and its age told him there should be a mechanical backup unless someone removed it. He found the backup cover sealed with a tamper strip, and the strip had been peeled and reattached poorly. They planned for this, Dax said. He peeled the cover fully and exposed a manual wheel. The wheel moved when he spun it, and the pressure door cracked open. Cold air spilled through, sharp and clean, smelling like normal station air. Ren took a greedy breath. That's freedom, Ren said. Dax shook his head. That's a corridor. Freedom is outside their reach. They moved through the pressure door into a narrow hallway leading toward the Academy's central ring. Ahead, they heard voices, not pursuit but confusion. Mira whispered, your packet worked. Dax did not celebrate, because he heard boots behind them again. Run. They ran toward the central ring. The Academy's central ring was supposed to be pristine, a place for ceremonies and speeches and a clean myth of leadership. When Dax and his team burst into its edge, the myth looked torn. Cadets and instructors stood in clusters staring up at public display panels. Myra's broadcast looped the chamber diagram and the decontamination schedule, simple enough that even a visitor could understand. A hush fell as people noticed the four of them. It was not theatrical, it was human disbelief. Dax moved along the perimeter, scanning for exits. His team followed, suits smeared with dust, breathing loud. A shout rose across the ring. Stop them. Containment troopers pushed into view from a side corridor. They moved in tight formation, weapons raised not to kill but to control, and that felt worse than a clean end. A tall man stepped with them, uniform crisp, haircut severe. Commander Havoc. His gaze locked onto Dax like a clamp, and his voice carried without yelling. Cadets, you are under Academy custody. You endangered station safety, and you will comply. Mira swallowed hard. He's flipping it. He's making us the threat. Ren clenched his fists. I want to hit him. Dax kept his eyes on Havoc. You scheduled decontamination with us inside. Havoc did not blink. False contamination flags are common during evaluation stress events. You panicked and broke protocol. A few instructors looked uncertain, and some cadets murmured. Doubt spread like a slow leak. Then Celine Rook appeared on an upper walkway, flanked by 2 security officers gripping her arms. Her face was pale but set, and she met Dax's gaze without looking away. Havoc followed Dax's eyes and smiled slightly. Lieutenant Rook attempted unauthorized access and sabotage. She will be disciplined, and you will not make this worse. Dax felt something tighten behind his ribs, clean and cold. He raised his voice just enough to be heard. Lieutenant Rook tried to keep us alive, Dax said. Havoc lifted a hand, and the troopers stepped forward. Dax shifted his weight, not to fight them in the ring but to force a choice. He looked at Mira. Can you broadcast live? Myra's hands trembled. They'll cut it. Do it anyway, Dax said. Mira tapped her comm, and her voice came out stronger than her hands. This is Cadet Mira Kale. The decontamination schedule was real. Oxygen recirculation was cut. We removed a hijack module from the chamber conduit. Commander Havoc is lying. Havoc's face tightened for the first time. Seize them. Troopers surged. Dax grabbed an emergency barrier handle and yanked. A transparent shield rose from the floor with a whine, splitting the approach path into 2. Ren and Juno followed without being told, pulling a second handle. Another shield rose and created a narrow channel toward an exit corridor. Cadets stumbled back in shock. A trooper fired a stun pulse at Ren. Dax stepped into its path and took the hit across his suit. The jolt locked his muscles for half a second like a steel fist in his spine, and he gritted through it and kept moving. Ren stared at him. You took that for me. Dax's voice came rough. Keep moving. They reached the exit corridor and pushed through. Behind them, troopers shouted, and shields whined as overrides failed under crowd eyes. Dax's muscles loosened as the stun effect faded. His suit sensors blinked warnings, and he ignored them. Myra's comm crackled. Someone is cutting the broadcast. Dax kept moving. We already planted doubt. That's enough. Juno checked her wrist display. Our oxygen is still low. Dax nodded once. We need station air, not chamber air. Find a safe zone with independent life support. Ren's voice turned grim. And then what? We hide. Dax did not slow. We survive long enough for witnesses to win. They reached a service junction with 2 marked routes. One led toward medical, and one led deeper into maintenance where control systems lived. Juno read the signs quickly. Medical is closer. Mira looked at Dax. Maintenance gives us leverage. Dax chose without hesitation. Maintenance. Ren swore under his breath. You always choose the hard route. Dax cut through fear for a fraction. Hard routes have fewer people. They took maintenance. Maintenance on Esterion looked like a place that did not matter, a labyrinth of ducts, control boxes, and old ladders. It was where real power lived, and real power did not care about ceremony. They reached a junction where a large air handling unit thumped steadily. The air here was cooler and denser, and Dax felt his lungs relax. Mira leaned against a wall, breathing hard. We bought minutes, not freedom. Juno crouched at a control panel, eyes fixed. The station safety logic is rejecting the purge, but someone keeps reasserting it. Ren gave a bitter laugh. So the murderer is fighting the station. Dax scanned the panel. Can you trace the reassertion source? Juno nodded slowly. If I tap the control bus. I need time. Dax looked back down the corridor. You have it. I will give it to you. He moved to a position where he could see both approaches. He took a maintenance tool from a rack, not as a weapon, but as a lever. Mira whispered, you're going to block them? Dax stayed calm. I'm going to delay them. Celine's voice came faint in Dax's ear. Dax, can you hear me? He answered quietly. Yes. Her breathing sounded tight. They are moving me to a secure office. Havoc is pushing a narrative that you staged a break to cover cheating. Dax's jaw tightened. Where is the masked visitor? Celine hesitated. I saw them briefly, not in uniform. They moved like they owned the station. Her voice dropped lower. If they catch you, they'll disappear you before any review. Dax kept his tone steady. Then we make disappearing loud. He ended the channel to conserve bandwidth. Juno spoke without looking up. I have a trace. The reassertion source is not Havoc's console. It's an external oversight node tied into Academy security. Myra's eyes widened. So someone higher. Juno nodded. Masked credential, but the signal path goes to docking ring 3. Ren's face hardened. They're here in person. Dax nodded once. Good. People in person make mistakes. Boots came from the corridor, careful and spaced now. They were hunting. Dax slid a crate into a narrow gap and built a choke point. He did not build a fortress, he built seconds. Myra's voice shook. We can't win a firefight. Dax looked at her. We're not doing that. Juno's fingers moved fast. If I cut the oversight node's control, the purge stops permanently. Ren hissed, do it. Juno hesitated. If I cut it, the node will log the act. Whoever owns it will know. Dax's voice stayed even. Let them know. Juno made the cut. The air handling unit's hum changed pitch slightly, like a machine relaxing. On the panel, the decontamination sequence status shifted to an abort state due to safety conflict. Mira exhaled hard. The chamber won't kill anyone now. Dax nodded. That saves lives. It does not save us. A new tone sounded, a station alert for security lockdown. They were sealing sections. Ren's eyes flashed. They're sealing the station. Dax turned to Juno. Docking ring 3. Can you open a path? Juno swallowed. Maybe, if we use the emergency ladder route. Dax faced his team. We go to docking ring 3, confront the masked node, secure proof of who did this. Myra's voice went thin. That's insane. Dax's eyes stayed level. Insane is letting them write the story. They moved. The emergency ladder route was narrow and steep. They climbed, boots ringing on metal rungs, and Dax kept his breathing controlled. At the top, they emerged into a service loft overlooking docking ring 3. Below, a sleek shuttle sat at the berth, not Academy standard, with no visible markings. A cluster of security staff stood nearby. In their center, a man in a plain dark coat watched the bay like he owned it, and Commander Havoc stood near him with posture slightly deferential. Ren whispered, "That's our masked visitor." Myra's throat tightened. "Who is he?" Juno zoomed her visor camera and frowned. "His badge is blank. It's the kind that doesn't need printing." Dax watched the man and saw no hurry and no fear. He saw only the confidence of someone protected by layers of authority. "We need his name in the open," Dax said. Mira pointed subtly toward the public announcement console near the berth. "If I can get to that console, I can push an audio clip." Ren whispered, "There are troopers everywhere." Dax studied the bay layout, catwalks, cargo pallets, and a maintenance crane. He found a route that was not safe, but possible. Mira read his face. "We split." Dax shook his head. "We don't split." Juno pointed up and forward. "There's a service drop right above the announcement console." Dax nodded. "We drop. We speak. We leave." Ren stared at him. Speak to who? The guy who owns the badge. Dax answered without raising his voice. To everyone. They moved along the loft edge until they were above the console. Below, HFY leaned toward the plain-coated man and spoke quietly, and the man listened without turning his head. Dax checked the distance and measured it in heartbeats. He could drop, roll, and reach the console before security reacted, but he would have no advantage from delayed lights here. He looked at Ren. On my signal, create noise. Ren frowned. How? Dax pointed at a loose cargo strap dangling near a pallet. Pull it. Drop the pallet near the shuttle, not on people. Ren nodded, jaw tight. Dax looked at Mira. When I reach the console, you broadcast. Mira swallowed. What do I broadcast? We don't have his name. Dax kept his eyes on the plain-coated man. We broadcast what they can't deny. We name the purge order, the masked node traced to this dock, HFY's presence, and then we ask one question. Mira nodded, breathing shallow. A question makes them answer. Dax gave a small nod, agreement without comfort. Ren yanked the cargo strap. A pallet crashed onto the deck near the shuttle with a metallic bang. Heads turned, security shifted toward the noise, and Dax dropped. He landed hard, rolled, and came up running. He reached the announcement console and slammed his palm onto the activation plate. Myra's voice came through his comm, steadier as she spoke, and it broadcast through docking bay speakers, clear and unavoidable. Attention Asterian personnel, Mira said. The final evaluation chamber was placed under false contamination. Oxygen recirculation was cut, and decontamination was scheduled with cadets inside. A masked oversight node reasserted the purge until we cut it, and the trace path leads to docking ring 3, Mira continued. Commander HFY is present with an unmarked shuttle. Murmurs rolled through the bay, and some security officers froze. Others looked at HFY, waiting. Dax stepped away from the console and raised his voice just enough to carry. Who authorized the purge? The plain-coated man finally turned. His eyes were calm, almost bored, and he looked at Dax like Dax was a smudge on a window. HFY snapped, sharp and panicked. Seize them now. Containment troopers moved, but slower than before. Doubt had weight, and the bay had too many witnesses. The plain-coated man raised one hand, not shouting, only gesturing. HFY stopped mid-step, and that gesture held more authority than any weapon. The man spoke smoothly. You are cadets. You do not understand oversight. Dax stared back. We understand oxygen. A few people laughed nervously, not because it was funny. They laughed because it was human, and they needed something to hold on to. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. This academy serves stability, and stability requires silence. Dax stayed even. Silence requires bodies. The man looked at the console. You forced spectacle. Dax did not deny it. You forced murder. For the first time, the man's calm cracked into calculation. He looked around at bay personnel, instructors, and security officers who now hesitated under public eyes. Celine Rook appeared at the far entrance, escorted but now surrounded by witnesses. Her face was bruised where someone had gripped too hard, and she met Dax's gaze and did not look away. The plain-coated man spoke again, voice measured. Commander HFY acted outside direct instruction. He will be investigated. HFY went pale. Sir, you said. The man lifted a finger, and HFY stopped. Dax kept his eyes on the man. Investigation needs a name. A hush fell, and everyone wanted it, the thing that turned rumor into record. The plain-coated man smiled slightly. Names are for people who can be replaced, he said. Dax answered flatly. Then you can be replaced. Annoyance flickered in the man's eyes. He had not expected the bay to become a stage he did not control. A senior instructor stepped forward, voice shaking but loud. "I want his credential recorded right now." Another instructor raised a device to record. Containment troopers looked at each other, trained to obey and trained to avoid public disgrace. The plain-coated man exhaled once, almost imperceptible. Then he spoke clearly enough for every mic. "My name is Armand Vey," he said. "Oversight Committee. Procurement and Strategic Containment." The words hit the bay like weight. Mira whispered through the comm, barely containing it. "We got it," she said. Dax stayed controlled. "Good." Armand Vey's tone turned cold. "Now you will stand down." Dax asked the question that forced a record. "Did you authorize the purge?" Silence answered first. Vey held Dax's gaze. He did not say yes, and he did not say no. He said, "You will not survive the consequences of forcing this." That was the closest thing to a confession he would give. Dax nodded like he had heard an unpleasant weather report. "We already didn't," Dax said. Troopers moved again, but their restraint tools lowered slightly. The bay hovered one spark away from chaos. Dax leaned closer to Myra's mic and spoke one sentence meant to live beyond him. "Archive the broadcast and send it to external review channels." Mira answered tight. "Already done." Dax looked at Celine across the bay. She gave one small nod, professional and unflinching. Ren whispered, "What now?" Dax scanned exits. "Now we get out before someone decides silence is worth more than reputation." Juno pointed to a side corridor. "Emergency egress. It leads to medical and then station customs." Dax nodded. "We move." They ran. Containment troopers tried to follow, but instructors stepped into their path and demanded procedures and orders on record. The troopers hesitated, and that hesitation was oxygen. Dax and his team disappeared into the corridor. Medical bay lights were bright and steady. The air smelled clean, real clean, not chemical clean. A medic stepped forward, then froze when he saw their suits and the dust. "What happened?" Mira spoke before Dax could. "We need external review now. No internal custody." The medic looked uncertain, then glanced at the public display in medical. It was already replaying the broadcast clip, and Armand Vey's name was stamped into rumor-turned-record. The medic swallowed. "Sit. Let me check your oxygen saturation." Dax sat because it bought time and because refusing would look like flight. His mind did not rest, and he watched the door and listened for the shape of footsteps. Celine entered 5 minutes later, escorted by a senior instructor rather than security. Her eyes were sharp, and she moved straight to Dax's bed. "They can't erase it now," Celine said. "Too many people saw it, and too many recorded it." Dax answered quietly. "They can still erase us." Celine nodded once. "I know." Ren lay on another bed with his suit unsealed and bruises visible. He looked at Celine. "They hit you." Celine did not soften. "I can handle bruises." Mira asked, voice small. "What happens to us?" Celine looked at Dax first, then answered all of them. "External review will take custody. It's not safety, it's a different cage." Juno stared at her grease-stained hands. "Will they call us traitors?" Celine stayed steady. "Some will. Some will call you witnesses. What matters is you stay consistent." Dax looked at Celine. "What about you?" Celine held his gaze. "I broke protocol. I will be suspended at minimum, maybe charged, but I can live with that." She added, voice lower and plain. "I couldn't live with watching you suffocate." Dax nodded once, recognition without a speech. A new voice came from the bay entrance, calm and official. 2 officers in neutral station authority uniforms stepped in, followed by a woman with a tablet and a badge with a printed name. Cadet Corin. Lieutenant Rook, the woman said. I am Director Hannah Pell, External Review Liaison for Station Incidents. You are under protective custody pending inquiry. Myra's shoulders sagged with relief that lasted 1 second. Reality returned immediately. Dax asked the only question that mattered. Are we safe? Director Pell did not pretend. Safe is not a promise I give, but you will not be disappeared by Academy security. Ren exhaled. Good enough. Director Pell looked at Celine. Lieutenant, you will be included. Your statement is critical. Celine's jaw tightened. Understood. Director Pell turned back to Dax. You forced an oversight official to speak his name. That created a record, and you also created enemies. Dax stayed dry. Enemies were already there. Director Pell almost smiled, but not quite. You will be transferred off this station within the hour. Dax nodded. Then move. They were moved through a side corridor away from the main hall. The station authority officers did not rush, but they did not linger either. People who had survived bureaucratic violence knew time was a weapon. As they walked, Dax heard distant shouting in the academy ring, a crowd that had tasted scandal and wanted accountability. He kept his face blank. Celine walked beside him with posture straight, and neither tried to fill the silence. At the airlock to a neutral transport, Director Pell stopped. One more thing. Armand Vey is not the only one. He is a node in a larger structure. Dax's eyes narrowed slightly. So this happens elsewhere? Director Pell nodded. Yes. Ren muttered, exhausted. Of course it does. Mira looked at Dax. Are we done? Dax answered without dramatics. We are done with this station. Juno asked carefully. And the bigger thing? Dax did not promise a crusade. We don't ignore it. They boarded the transport. The hatch sealed, air hissed, and the station's hum softened as distance grew. Through a small viewport, Dax saw Asterian Orbital Academy recede, a bright ring against the dark. Celine spoke quietly for the first time without urgency. You could have complied. You could have knelt, Celine said. Dax stayed calm. Kneeling doesn't make oxygen. Celine's mouth twitched, almost a smile, then it disappeared. You're impossible. Dax looked forward. I'm predictable. The transport's engines thrummed, and the seat harness tightened. The external review officers checked their straps without looking afraid. Dax's wrist display pinged with a new message routed through neutral authority channels. It was not from the Academy, and it was not from Celine. It came from an address he did not recognize. The message contained a single sentence, an invitation to observe a different academy's final evaluation. There was no signature and no explanation. Dax stared at it for 2 seconds, then closed it. He did not need more to understand the shape of what was coming. The transport rolled, aligning for burn, and Asterian slipped behind a curve of light. Asterian shrank in the viewport until it was just a bright ring pretending nothing had happened. Dax did not watch it fade, he watched his team breathe. Real breaths, no countdown and no warning tone. Only proof they were still here. Across from him, Lieutenant Celine Rook sat with her shoulders squared. She wore the stillness of someone who had paid a price and decided it was worth it. She did not ask for thanks. Dax did not offer speeches. They both understood the same truth. The Academy would not call this courage. It would call it a problem. Director Pell's transport cut through open space, engines steady, lights low. Somewhere behind them, committees would argue, commanders would deny, and careful men would erase whatever they could reach. But not the name. Not anymore. Dax opened the message once more and read the single sentence again. It was cold and routine, inviting him to another academy's final evaluation. He closed it again, slow, like closing a door he already knew he would reopen. Celine glanced over. You're going to go? Dax kept his voice flat. If they're doing it there, they're doing it everywhere. And if it's a trap? Celine asked. He did not look at her. Then we walk in with our eyes open. The transport rotated, aligning for the next burn. For a moment the stars stretched thin and sharp, like scratches on glass. Dax rested his head against the seat and let the hum of engines fill the silence. It was not peace, it was distance. Distance was never the same as safety. If you stayed with them to the very end, you already understand what this story is really about. It's not just a test, it's who profits when the rules break, and who gets erased when they refuse to stay quiet. So here's my question for you. Would you have knelt and lived on their terms, or would you have forced the truth into the open, even if it made you a target? If this episode hit you, do me a favor. Tap like so YouTube knows this kind of story deserves oxygen. Share it with a friend who loves intense science fiction survival stories. And subscribe to the channel, because the next mission isn't a continuation of this case. It's something new, but it starts with the same warning. When an evaluation becomes a weapon, the only way out is to move first. See you in the next story.